Commander Julia Reed knew she was innocent. The Navy knew she was innocent. Everyone involved knew she was innocent, and she was going to be convicted anyway, not because of a failure of justice, not because of a corrupt system, but because the Navy needed someone to take the fall for a catastrophic failure that could compromise national security if the real cause was exposed. Julia was going to be sacrificed, knowingly, deliberately, by people who understood exactly what they were doing, and she was going to accept it, because sometimes one person's career is worth less than protecting thousands of lives. This is a story about the sacrificial scapegoat, about being innocent and being destroyed anyway, not by accident or malice, but by calculation, about accepting injustice because the alternative is worse. It started with a cybersecurity breach at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. Hackers gained access to the electronic medical record system, downloaded files containing sensitive medical information on high-ranking military officers, intelligence personnel, and members of Congress, information that could be used for blackmail, extortion, compromise, information that threatened national security. The breach was catastrophic, not just for the individuals affected, but for military operations, intelligence activities, and government stability. The Navy's cybersecurity team traced the breach to a vulnerability in the medical record system, a backdoor that had been deliberately created during a system upgrade 3 years earlier. Someone with access to the system had intentionally weakened security, created a pathway for external access, enabled the breach. The investigation identified the person who'd authorized the system upgrade and had administrative access to create the backdoor. Commander Julia Reed, Chief Information Officer for Walter Reed's Medical Systems. Julia was called to a classified briefing, expected to be told about the breach, expected to help investigate. Instead, she was told she was the prime suspect. Commander Reed, the breach originated from a backdoor created using your administrative credentials. During the 2019 system upgrade, you had the access, the knowledge, and the opportunity to create this vulnerability. Julia was stunned. I didn't create any backdoor. The system upgrade was conducted by an outside contractor. I supervised, but I didn't have direct access to the code. Your credentials were used. The access logs show your username and password. Then someone used my credentials. This is identity theft or credential compromise, not an inside job. The investigators exchanged glances. Commander, we need to be direct with you. This breach has compromised national security. Congress is demanding accountability. The media will learn about this soon. We need someone to charge. Julia felt ice forming in her stomach. You know I didn't do this. We know the evidence points to your credentials being used. Whether you personally created the backdoor or someone used your access to create it, the result is the same. The breach happened on your watch, using your access. So you're making me the scapegoat. We're following the evidence. But Julia saw the truth in their eyes. They weren't following evidence to find the culprit. They were following political necessity to find someone to blame. 2 days later, Julia was called to a meeting at the Pentagon. Just her and a 2-star admiral she'd never met before. Admiral Catherine Walsh closed the door. Commander Reed, what I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest level. You cannot repeat it. You cannot act on it. You can only listen. Julia nodded. The breach at Walter Reed was not an isolated incident. It was part of a sophisticated operation by a foreign intelligence service that has been targeting U.S. military medical systems for 3 years. They've compromised multiple facilities, stolen data on thousands of service members, created vulnerabilities throughout our medical infrastructure. Then why are you investigating me instead of them? Because we can't let them know we've discovered their operation. We're currently running a counterintelligence effort to identify their full network, neutralize their access, and potentially feed them false information. If we publicly acknowledge the real source of the breach, we compromise that operation. Julia understood immediately. So you need a cover story, a simpler explanation, an inside job rather than a sophisticated foreign operation. We need someone to take responsibility for the breach in a way that doesn't expose the larger threat. You need a scapegoat. We need a sacrifice. Walsh's voice was not unkind. Commander Reed, you're innocent. We know that the breach was caused by foreign actors using advanced techniques to compromise credentials and insert back. You did nothing wrong, but you're going to charge me anyway. We're going to offer you a choice. Walsh laid out the situation. If we prosecute you for creating the backdoor negligence, not espionage, it explains the breach without exposing the foreign intelligence operation. The story becomes, Navy officer made catastrophic security mistake that enabled breach. It's embarrassing but containable. And if I refuse to be the scapegoat, then we prosecute the case accurately. We reveal that foreign intelligence compromised our medical systems. We explain the full scope of the operation. Congress holds hearings, media coverage is extensive, and the foreign actors immediately know we've discovered them. They pull back. We lose our chance to neutralize their network and protect future operations. Potentially compromised ongoing intelligence operations that depend on them not knowing we're aware of their access. Exactly. Your innocence becomes public. You're vindicated, but thousands of service members remain vulnerable. Intelligence operations are compromised. National security is damaged. Julia felt sick. So my choice is, be innocent and cause national security damage, or be guilty and protect the mission. Your choice is, accept conviction for something you didn't do and allow us to quietly neutralize a major threat, or prove your innocence and force us to expose vulnerabilities we're not ready to address publicly. That's not a choice. That's extortion. That's service to your country in the hardest way possible. Julia spent 3 days thinking, consulted with no one. She'd been ordered to keep the classified briefing secret. She reviewed her options. Option 1, fight the charges, prove her innocence, force the Navy to acknowledge the foreign intelligence operation, get vindicated, watch the counterintelligence operation collapse, watch security vulnerabilities remain unaddressed because public disclosure would force rushed responses rather than careful fixes. Option 2, accept the charges, plead guilty to negligence, take a court-martial conviction, lose her career, protect the counterintelligence operation, allow the Navy to quietly neutralize the threats, protect thousands of service members. She thought about the oath she'd taken 20 years earlier, to support and defend the Constitution, to obey orders, to bear true faith and allegiance. She thought about the service members whose medical records had been compromised, whose safety depended on neutralizing the threat quietly. She thought about her career, her reputation, her future. And she made her decision. Julia called Admiral Walsh. I'll do it. I'll plead guilty. You understand what this means. Court-martial conviction, dishonorable discharge, prison time, loss of all benefits, your career destroyed, your reputation ruined. I understand. What do I get in return? The knowledge that you protected national security, the classification of the real circumstances, and a promise that when the counterintelligence operation is complete and the threats are neutralized, we'll quietly correct your record. How long? Could be 5 years, could be longer. The operation is ongoing. So I take the fall publicly and wait years for a correction that would be classified and no one will ever know about. Yes. Julia was quiet for a long moment. I joined the Navy to serve. This is service. I'll do it. Commander Reed, what you're doing is the hardest kind of sacrifice. You'll be vilified for something you didn't do. People will think you're a criminal. Your family won't understand. Your friends will abandon you. And you can never tell them the truth. I know. Are you certain? I'm certain. Julia was charged with negligent creation of security, vulnerabilities that enabled unauthorized access to classified medical records. Not espionage that would require proving intent, just catastrophic negligence. She pled guilty, refused to mount a defense, refused to explain or justify. The prosecutor presented evidence. Julia's credentials had been used to create the backdoor. She'd had administrative access. She'd supervised the upgrade. The breach had occurred on her watch. Julia's assigned defense attorney begged her to fight. Commander, you can challenge this. We can argue credential compromise. We can show you didn't have direct code access. We can. I'm pleading guilty. But you're innocent. That's not relevant to my decision. The attorney didn't understand, couldn't understand, because Julia couldn't tell her the truth. The military judge asked Julia directly, Commander Reed, do you understand that by pleading guilty, you're admitting responsibility for a security breach that compromised national security? Yes, Your Honor. Do you understand you face up to 10 years confinement, dishonorable discharge, and forfeiture of all pay and benefits? Yes, Your Honor. And you still wish to plead guilty? Yes, Your Honor. The judge studied her, saw something in her expression, something that suggested there was more to this story. But judges don't ask questions when defendants plead guilty. Sentence, 5 years confinement, dishonorable discharge, reduction to E1, forfeiture of all pay and benefits. Julia accepted the sentence without emotion. She'd sacrificed herself knowingly. This was the price that Julia entered the Naval Consolidated Brig to serve her 5-year sentence. She was processed like any other inmate. Strip search, prison uniform, cell assignment. Other inmates asked what she'd done. I compromised national security through negligence. Enabled a breach of classified medical records. You a hacker or something. I was a systems administrator. I made a mistake that hackers exploited. It was easier to tell that simplified version than to stay completely silent. And it was close enough to what people believed. But at night, alone in her cell, Julia felt the weight of what she'd done. She was innocent, provably innocent, could have defended herself, could have been vindicated, and had chosen this instead. Some nights she questioned the decision, wondered if one person's sacrifice was really worth it, wondered if the Navy would keep its promise to eventually correct the record. But most nights, she felt at peace. She'd made the choice that protected others, that served something larger than herself, that embodied the oath she'd taken 20 years earlier. Even if no one would ever know. Julia's family didn't understand. Her sister Michelle visited 6 months into the sentence. Julia, why did you plead guilty? Everyone knows you're brilliant with security. You'd never make a mistake like that. Why didn't you fight? I made a mistake. I'm accepting responsibility. That's not like you. Something else is going on. Tell me, there's nothing else. I made an error in judgment. It had serious consequences. I'm serving my sentence. Michelle was frustrated. You're lying to me. I can tell. There's something you're not saying. Michelle, this is what happened. Please accept that. I can't accept my sister being in prison for something that doesn't make sense. Julia wanted to tell her, wanted to explain that she was protecting national security, that her sacrifice mattered, that she was still serving her country, just in a way no one could acknowledge. But she couldn't. The classification prevented it. And even if it didn't, would Michelle understand? Would anyone? Michelle stopped visiting after a year. The silence Julia couldn't break had destroyed their relationship. Media coverage of Julia's case was harsh. Navy commander's negligence enabled catastrophic security breach. Medical records of high-ranking officials compromised due to poor cybersecurity practices. Cybersecurity experts commented, "This case highlights the dangers of inadequate training and oversight in military systems. Commander Reed's negligence put national security at risk." Julia read the articles during her limited internet access in prison, saw herself portrayed as incompetent, negligent, a cautionary tale about the importance of cybersecurity training. None of it was true, but she couldn't correct it. A cybersecurity advocacy group invited her to speak after her release. "Your case could help us push for better training and accountability in military systems." Julia would have to decline, because the story they wanted her to tell wasn't true, and the truth was classified. Admiral Walsh visited Julia in prison. Unusual for an admiral to visit an E1 inmate. They met in a private conference room. Commander Walsh caught herself. "Julia, I wanted to update you personally. Is the operation complete?" "Not yet. We've neutralized about 60% of the foreign intelligence network, but they're adaptive. Every time we close one pathway, they develop new techniques. It's taking longer than we hoped." "How much longer?" "At least another 3 to 5 years, possibly longer." Julia felt her heart sink. "So I serve my 5 years, get released, and still can't have my record corrected for years after that?" "Potentially, yes. I'm sorry. This is taking longer than anyone anticipated." "Will it ever be corrected?" Walsh hesitated. "Honestly, I don't know. The longer the operation continues, the more complicated it becomes. There may never be a point where we can safely acknowledge the truth without compromising ongoing operations or exposing sources and methods, so I might be sacrificed permanently. He might be sacrificed permanently." Walsh met her eyes. "I won't lie to you. That's a real possibility. The promise I made about correcting your record assumed a finite operation, but intelligence operations often don't have clean endings." Julia processed this. She'd accepted sacrifice for a specific timeline, 5 to 10 years. Now she was being told it might be forever. "Do you regret your choice?" Walsh asked. Julia thought about it. "I regret that it's necessary. I regret that this is what service looks like sometimes. But do I regret protecting the operation? No. I'd make the same choice again." "That's more than most people could say." Most people aren't asked to make this choice. Walsh stood to leave. Julia, what you're doing matters, even if no one ever knows. Even if we can never acknowledge it. You're protecting thousands of people. That has value. Tell that to my family who thinks I'm a disgraced criminal. I would if I could, but this is the nature of classified service. The people who matter most can never know what you've done. Julia was released after serving 5 years, age 47, dishonorable discharge on her record, convicted felon, no military benefits, no pension despite 25 years of service. She'd given the Navy a quarter century and walked away with nothing but a criminal record. She moved to a small apartment in Virginia, applied for civilian cybersecurity jobs. Every interview ended the same way. Your technical skills are impressive, but you have a conviction for negligence that enabled a national security breach. We can't hire someone with that record. It's a liability issue. I can explain the circumstances. The conviction speaks for itself. I'm sorry. Julia ended up working at helpdesk for a small company, resetting passwords, troubleshooting printer connections, skills vastly below her capabilities, but it was employment. She lived quietly, kept to herself, carried the weight of knowing she was innocent, while the world believed she was guilty, and couldn't tell anyone the truth. Julia received a classified letter, instructed to report to a secure facility for a briefing. She met with a different admiral. Walsh had retired. Ms. Reed, I'm Admiral James Morrison. I've been briefed on your situation. I wanted to update you on the counterintelligence operation. Is it complete? No. The operation has evolved. We've neutralized the specific threats at Walter Reed and other medical facilities. But in doing so, we've identified a larger network targeting other military systems. The operation has expanded significantly. How long until my record is corrected? Morrison looked uncomfortable. That's why I asked to meet. The decision has been made that your record will not be corrected. Julia felt like she'd been punched. What? The operation has become too complex. Too many moving parts. Too many ongoing activities that would be compromised if we acknowledged the original breach was foreign intelligence rather than insider negligence. Your conviction has become part of the cover story that protects multiple operations. You promised me, Admiral Walsh promised you, with the understanding that the operation would be finite. It's not, and the Navy has determined that maintaining your conviction serves ongoing national security interests. So I'm sacrificed permanently for operations that will never end. I know this isn't what you agreed to. I agreed to sacrifice. I agreed to protect the mission. I did not agree to be permanently branded a criminal for something I didn't do. Morrison's voice was quiet. I know, and I'm sorry, but this is the decision. Can I at least tell my family the truth, so they understand? No, the classification remains. You cannot disclose any of this. Julia felt rage building, so I did everything you asked. Sacrificed my career, my reputation, my family relationships, and now you're telling me it was all for nothing because you'll never keep your promise. It wasn't for nothing. You protected thousands of people. That matters even if you never get recognition for it. Recognition? I don't want recognition. I want the truth. I want my family to know I'm not a criminal. I understand, but that's not possible. Julia stood. Is there anything else? Just thank you for your service. What you did mattered. It mattered so much you're permanently destroying my life. Thank you, Admiral. I understand perfectly now what my service is worth to the Navy. She left the meeting furious, betrayed, understanding that she'd been sacrificed not temporarily, but permanently. Julia was 52, still working at helpdesk, still carrying a conviction for something she didn't do, still unable to tell anyone the truth. Her sister Michelle reached out. They hadn't spoken in 8 years. Julia, I've been thinking about you, about what happened. I was angry for a long time that you wouldn't tell me the truth, but I've come to realize, maybe you couldn't tell me. Maybe there was something classified that prevented you from explaining. Julia was careful. I pled guilty to the charges. That's what happened. But you were always so careful, so skilled. The idea that you'd make a mistake like that never made sense. Michelle paused. I'm not asking you to violate any classifications. I'm just saying, I think I understand now, and I'm sorry I abandoned you. Julia felt tears forming. There's nothing to understand. I made a mistake. I paid for it, okay? But Julia, I love you, and I believe you did what you thought was right. Whatever that was, it was the closest Michelle could come to acknowledging the truth without Julia confirming it, and it was enough. They rebuilt their relationship slowly. Michelle never asked again. Julia never explained, but the understanding existed between them. Julia was 57, 15 years since her conviction. The Navy had never corrected her record, had never publicly acknowledged the truth. But the medical record systems at Walter Reed and other facilities were secure. The foreign intelligence network had been disrupted. The counterintelligence operations had protected countless service members. Julia still worked at help desk, still carried the conviction, still couldn't tell anyone what she'd really done. A young Navy officer came into her office for tech support, saw Julia's Navy veteran coffee mug. Did you serve? 25 years. What did you do? Systems administration, medical records systems. That must have been important work. Medical systems security is critical. Julia smiled sadly. It was important, more than most people know. The young officer left, problem solved, had no idea he'd just been helped by someone who'd sacrificed everything to protect the systems he thought were important. Julia sat at her desk, resetting another password, and felt at peace for the first time in years. She'd been sacrificed, betrayed, permanently, branded a criminal for something she didn't do, but she'd also protected thousands of people, had enabled operations that saved lives, had served her country in the hardest way possible. No one would ever know. Her sacrifice would never be acknowledged. Her record would never be corrected. But she knew, and that had to be enough. Julia was 62, working part-time IT support at a community college, living quietly in retirement. She received a letter from the Department of Defense, classified, instructed to report to a secure facility that she assumed it was. Another briefing telling her that operation still wasn't complete. Instead, she met with a 3-star admiral. Ms. Reed, I'm Admiral Patricia Chen. I've reviewed your case. The counterintelligence operation you protected concluded 5 years ago. The threats have been neutralized. The classification is being downgraded. Julia felt her heart race. My record will be corrected. No, the hope died. Then why am I here? Because I wanted to tell you personally that what you did mattered. That we know you were innocent. That your sacrifice protected a critical operation. And that even though we can't publicly acknowledge it, I wanted you to hear it from someone who understands what you gave up. That's it. No correction, no acknowledgement. Just thank you for your sacrifice. I know it's not enough. You're right. It's not enough. I gave you 25 years of service. I sacrificed my career, my reputation, my family relationships. I spent 5 years in prison. I've spent 15 years unable to get employment in my field, all because I trusted the Navy to keep its promise. Ms. Reed, I don't regret protecting the operation. I'd make the same choice again, but I will never forgive the Navy for betraying its promise to correct the record. You asked me to sacrifice. I did. You promised eventual vindication. You lied. Admiral Chen had no response. Julia stood. Is there anything else? Just thank you for your service in the way that mattered most. Julia left, drove home, sat in her small apartment, and felt both pride and bitterness. Pride that she'd protected something important, bitterness that it had cost everything, and no one would ever know. She'd been the sacrificial scapegoat, knowingly, willingly. And she'd learned that sometimes serving your country means being destroyed by ITTHAT's the price of classified service. The people who sacrifice most are the ones no one remembers. Julia Reed was innocent and would die branded a criminal, because some truths are too dangerous to acknowledge, and some heroes are sacrificed in silence.